I have a somewhat unpopular philosophy when it comes to creating art, especially when it comes to cinema. See, my idea is the more glorifying to God a work of art is, the more beautiful it's going to be. And the reason for that, I think, makes sense, because the idea is that God is the originator of all beauty, and so the more something is pointed towards God, and the more of an intention that the filmmaker or the artist had when creating that thing to point it towards God and to create that art for the express purpose of glorifying Him and edifying His creations, it's going to be more beautiful. That seems to make sense to me. And yet, unfortunately enough, in today's age, art, especially cinema that's created or labeled as Christian, gets a really bad rap. And look, I understand why this is true from a technical perspective, but it shouldn't be true. Christians, or people who call themselves Christians, should not be churning out low-level, low-budget B movies that don't have any real substance or value. To me, that seems to be a blot on the name of Jesus Christ. Because when we're creating art, and we're creating something that's truly beautiful, and we're using the talents that God has given us as human beings to inspire other people, we should be doing our absolute best to make that art the pinnacle of what human beings can do. And look, I'm not saying that all of us can be the next Scorsese, Tarantino, you name it. Not everyone is going to be a genius auteur director. But we have to put our all into making the art that we create truly beautiful. And of course, that's going to look different from person to person. There's different expressions of beauty, and there's varying levels of depth and philosophy that can be put into individual stories. But we have to be telling our stories to the best of our ability. And the only way, as someone who's a traditional Christian, that can be done is by pointing our art towards God. Over the weekend, I was blessed to be able to see a truly unique film. And the film that I'm talking about is El Tanto por Cristo, the brand new, totally independent, Orthodox Christian film about a fictional holy fool living in a monastery in a coastal town in Texas. And what was so wonderful about this screening, I was able to talk to the director and his family, which are the producers of the film, and was really inspired by the conversation that I had, however brief it was. But two, it reminded me of something, which is that we live in an era in which it is now possible, in a way that it never was before, it is now possible to create things of true beauty without having to sign on to a studio, without having to work with Hollywood, and without having to have other people involved with our art that are not thinking in the best interests of creating beauty, let alone glorifying God. We now live in an era, and this is super encouraging to me, we now live in an era in which we're able to make movies totally independently. Fundraising is possible somehow. Gear is cheap. And we're in a time in which we can make things, and we can make them on our terms. And as someone who's a Christian, those terms mean creating things that are truly beautiful. Now, one of the producers of this film, who's actually the wife of the director, said something that I found to be very poignant at the end of the screening. We were doing a bit of a Q&A, and she said something that I really resonate with, and I always have. She said, the goal when creating art, when creating movies in this specific context, is not to make Christian movies. It's not to make Christian art, but it's to be a Christian and make art. It's to be a Christian and practice those skills. Be a Christian and do whatever you're going to do, and do it to the best of your ability. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at in the introduction to this video, which is that my dream is to be able to create art that is beautiful and that edifies and inspires other human beings. And that by nature is going to be Christian. Because I'm a Christian. I'm an Orthodox Christian who worships God and is part of the traditional church. And I'm also an artist. And that means that art is going to reflect my lifestyle. See, that's something that I feel like people really lose sight of, which is they compartmentalize the things that they do with the person that they are. See, the bottom line is, at the end of the day, art cannot be separated from the artist. And what that means is that the lifestyle of the person who's creating that art is inherently wrapped up with the art that they create. And so that should be really encouraging for people who want to create inspirational, edifying, and beautiful art, and who are also religious, and who want to put those themes into their films, into their paintings, into their writings, is that your lifestyle is going to be wrapped up in your art no matter what. And if that's a lifestyle that you want to share with other people and you want to be reflected in your art, then just keep creating art to the best of your ability. And so I found that to be really encouraging in the context of this film, because what's so unique about this movie, El Tanto por Cristo, is that it is a movie that is beautiful in its own right. And that's really, really important. It's a film that does not parade itself as being an Orthodox Christian film, that does not go out there, and market itself as something that is monastic or is Eastern Orthodox and really delves deep into this mysticism that might be found in that faith. Instead, it simply exists as a beautiful work of art. And what I find to be so amazing about that is that it appeals not only to people who are already Orthodox Christians like me and most of the other people that were in the audience the night that I went and saw it, but also just to people who love this art form. It's a movie that was truly made for cinephiles and by cinephiles. I'd heard that in the first few screenings across the United States, it was playing at some historic theaters, at some venues that a lot of film critics and just lovers of the arts were at. And most of those crowds were not Orthodox Christians. Most of those crowds, the people in those crowds, were not religious at all. They were just people who loved art. See, that's what I think is so special about this effort, this project that they've made, is that it appeals not only to the people who understand the religion that it is talking about, but just to people who love movies, because it is just genuinely a beautiful and well-made film. And there's a couple of reasons why this is so cool. The first is because other efforts to create Orthodox cinema, and I'm not dissing on these efforts or saying that there wasn't any zeal behind them or that they were bad necessarily. I think that it's a huge step up for the world of filmmaking that these kinds of films were made. But they dealt with hagiography. And this is something that the more that I've thought about it, the more I've believed it most of the time to be true, which is that hagiography is almost impossible to render into cinema. Telling the lives of the saints of the church is something that you're going to have a really hard time doing in a film. Because the lives of the saints have always been told in a couple of different ways throughout the history of the Orthodox Church specifically. Through paintings, icons, and through hymns, and then through the writings of the church. Those have been given to us, and that's all we need in order to learn about the saints. Now, we do live in a modern era, and there are going to be people who learn about the saints through works like cinema, but it's just very difficult to create a work of art that is not only respectful to the saint that's involved, but also tells an accurate story. And there's one really important reason for that, which is the fact that cinema is inherently manipulative. The art of movie making, by its very nature, is about manipulation. The reason why we watch movies, the reason why films are created, is to make us feel something. It's to make us, force us almost, to feel certain emotions. And we're submitting ourselves to that. That's something that we want because we like the feeling of a film making us cry, or a film making us laugh, or a film scaring us, right? That's a manipulation that we're willingly going into. That's the reason why movies feel like magic, is because they make us feel things. And that's not a bad thing. I know that the word manipulation gets a bad rap, but it's not necessarily bad. It's actually an art that can be used in order to show the viewers how the filmmaker or the artist was feeling at that moment, and to give them an impression of what that's like. And there's a lot of benefits for that. I could talk all day about all the benefits and the beautiful things about that kind of manipulation. But since cinema is inherently manipulative, it's very difficult to tell an accurate, true-to-life story about someone who's so holy. We make biopics about famous people or about just normal, broken human beings, and we can turn those into really compelling stories. But they're never completely accurate because they have to be manipulative so that they can tell the story in a way that appeals to people. If you told my life story the way that, in a completely accurate way, shot for shot, detail for detail, beat for beat, it would probably be immensely boring. I don't think I have a boring life at all. I think my life is genuinely really exciting and amazing, but if you told it completely or accurately, it wouldn't translate to a movie that well. However, a good writer, a good director could make an absolute banger of a movie about the 20 years that I've been alive by using manipulative tactics. See, that's just the art of filmmaking. That's just what happens in that art. That's how it works. That's why we love it. But that's why it doesn't translate very well to hagiography, because we want to tell these stories respectfully and accurately. Those are our first priorities. Our first priorities are not necessarily moving people emotionally, not even necessarily inspiring people or edifying people, but just to tell those stories as accurately as possible. And they've been given to us as accurately as they're ever going to be, and so it's very difficult to add something new to that kind of art. So that's why I think that this film, El Tanto por Cristo, is so special, because it takes something similar to hagiography, which is telling about the life of a holy person, but it fictionalizes it. It's a very unique and creative look into something that isn't true. It's a story that's totally made up, but it has a lot of truth to it. So it tells the story of a fictional holy fool living in a fictional monastery in a fictional place in Texas, and these characters aren't real, but they reflect the lives of the saints. They reflect true stories from the Orthodox Christian tradition, and because of that, it's so much more effective, because we don't have to worry about this being, disrespectful to the real Father John, because there is no real Father John. He's just an archetype. He's simply a concept. And since he's abstract, we can get so much more out of his story because, again, we're not worrying about accuracy. We're simply telling a fable. We are telling a parable. And that's one of the things that I love the most about cinema, is that it is the way that we can tell parables that give people important messages about what it's like to be a human being and how to live this life properly. That's why we gain edification from this art form. El Tanto por Cristo is a different kind of film. And why I say that is because, again, the other Orthodox films I've experienced, the other Christian films I've experienced, a lot of the other just independent films that I've experienced of late don't have this quality, which is something that I find very, very admirable, especially from almost brand new filmmakers. Again, independent people, just down-to-earth human beings who want to create beauty. They were able to strike what I think is a wonderful balance between standing on the shoulders of giants and still prioritizing creativity. See, in this film, there's a lot of Wim Wenders, a lot of Jim Jarmusch, a lot of Andrei Tarkovsky. These things are very apparent. There are even whole scenes that are almost copied from some of these movies. But the film's humble about it. It knows, Josh David Jordan knows that he's standing on the shoulders of these giants and that he's using these archetypes and these images that are found in these master filmmakers of an earlier era. But he's using that in a way that is mindful and in its own way is still creative. Because, again, these things are present in the film, and you could call it copying, but I don't think it's really that. It's more like utilizing elements that we know and love, elements that we attribute to being beautiful, and using those in a new context, in a new story. Because again, every movie's new. Every movie is its own story, even if it copies a lot from other filmmakers and other artists. But this movie does it so well because it copies those things in such a mindful way and in such a unique and creative way that it comes off as still being its own thing, which I think is just really smart and really cool because it gives off this impression of being humble, and it's a small film. It feels like a passion project in the best way possible, and you can tell that it's just made by people who love movies and who love beauty, and it achieves both of those things. I hope you can tell that I was really inspired by watching this movie, and I think that's just kind of the key takeaway here that really struck me, was that this experience was just absolutely so inspiring for me as a filmmaker. After the movie, I was just buzzing, after getting to talk to the director briefly. I just walked out into the humid Texas air on the Texas A&M campus, which is where the screening was, and I was just grinning ear to ear, just babbling to my friends about just all the different things that it made me feel. Because, again, as a work of art, it wasn't like it's the best movie I've ever seen in the world. But the context that it was in, the fact that it was made by Orthodox Christians, that it was made by independent filmmakers with so little resources, with like the fact that they were able to get funding is still insane to me. Like, if this movie got made, then anything can get made. And I mean that in the most positive way possible. And that was just so inspirational to me. Talking to the filmmakers, experiencing the film itself was an absolutely unforgettable experience. And it reminded me that we live in a time in which it is possible to create beautiful art with so little limitation. And that gets me really hyped for our future and for my future as an artist. All that to say, the experience of watching El Tanto por Cristo is one of my absolute favorites of this entire year. It's a film that reminded me what's possible. And it's a film that inspired me to create more of my own art for the glory of God. And most of all, it's just a beautiful movie. It's something that I'll continue coming back to in my thoughts, and I eagerly await the time in which they'll release a Blu-ray so that I can actually have my own copy of the film. It's something that really leaves you thinking. You don't come away from that film the same person. And look, I'm the film critic guy, of course I'm going into this skeptical. I'm thinking, okay, it's an indie feature, it's not some big shot, super deep, amazing auteur filmmaking effort. It's small, it's simple, it's humble, but it's still able to change you. And that is one of the most amazing things that you can experience. So, huge props to the filmmakers, to Josh David Jordan and his family, which worked on the film with him. It was an unforgettable experience. It's something that I'm always going to cherish, and I'm really, really grateful to these filmmakers and to everyone who's involved in this film for inspiring all the people that they have inspired. And I'm really, really excited for whatever they have next for us. Indie filmmaking is rising, okay? It's coming. Just, be ready, okay? Because we've got some crazy stuff in store. I can feel it. I can feel it in the ground beneath me. It's buzzing. The energy of independent filmmakers, this new wave. I'm excited. You better be excited because it's gonna be amazing. And you'd best believe I'm gonna be part of that wave. All right, I am gonna be part of that wave, and I am absolutely so hyped for what's to come.